Hey everyone. Hi, I'm Barbara Ford Grant. I'm a member of the VES Tech Committee, and on behalf of the committee and the Visual Effects Society, welcome to this event. It looks like we have over 1,000 people who've RSVP'd, and we're very excited to hit on this topic. We've been using machine learning for years now, I know you know that, to enable all sorts of capabilities and attempting to make VFX artists' lives easier and achieving better visuals. Now with generative artificial intelligence, or GenAI, it's quickly becoming more powerful, more democratized, and raising lots of questions about what the future will hold for visual effects practitioners. I'm guessing you're also wondering why it's taken us so long to come out on this topic. And well, it's tricky, as you all know. It's a tricky topic on many levels. We are a unique demographic to AI in that we are not strangers to it, to the impact on us, and also to the ability to exploit it. The good news is we have brought together a group of forward-thinking professionals, awesome group of people. I'm really excited about this, ready to discuss how to navigate this new landscape of AI solutions, how the industry is likely to change in the coming years, and ways to adapt and grow in your career. We see this as a foundational first in a series of presentations we're hoping to bring to you, to the visual effects community in an effort to explore how generative AI will transform the VFX industry. So watch for future presentations involving more practitioners as well. Okay, so on to the speakers. We have a fantastic group, and we're so glad to have these individuals here today, starting with Susan O'Neill, who joined the VES in the late 1990s and has served as a member of its global board of directors in multiple roles, including the executive committee in 2016 as treasurer and as second vice chair in 2022 and 2023. O'Neill was honored with the VES Founders Award for Emeritus Service to the Society. She is currently a recruiter for BLT Recruiting and has worked as an operations manager at The Mill, operations director at Escape Studio in Los Angeles, and as account manager at Side Effects. She started her career in visual effects at Digital Domain in 1993, where she worked in finance and operations before turning to production. We also have Stephen Strauss, who's a shareholder and co-chair at the firm Buchalter in the entertainment industry group and an adjunct professor at Southwestern Law School. For over 30 years, Mr. Strauss has specialized in domestic and international trade, copyright, and fair competition matters. Mr. Strauss represents a number of internationally recognized celebrities, sports personalities, recording artists, chefs, authors, social media influencers, and media and entertainment companies. He also represents a wide range of diverse clients, including restaurants, banks, and financial institutions. It covers quite a lot. Clothing, toy manufacturers, and magazine and book publishers. We have Michele Sciolette, who is CTO and one of the partners at the Cinesite group. Michele joined Cinesite London in 2001 as a member of the R&D team specializing in image processing and computer vision. After multiple roles at the studio and winning an Emmy Award for his work on the TV series Rome, Michele stepped into his current role to support Cinesite's global expansion and move into feature animation. Michele, as I mentioned, is also a member of the VES Tech Committee. I'm glad to have him participating here. And then last but not least, very well-known person in this field, Andrew Glassner is a distinguished research scientist at Wētā Effects. He served as a SIGGRAPH Technical Papers Chair, Editor-in-Chief of ACM Transactions on Graphics. His books include Principles of Digital Image Synthesis and Deep Learning, A Visual Approach. His latest book, An Introduction to Quantum Computing, will be published in 2024. He has written 3 novels, several short films, and directed films, animations, and online games, not to mention all the graphics papers put out there. So I'm very excited to have all these panelists. And we're going to kick it off with a little sizzle.
Hey, everyone. My name is Susan O'Neill, and I'm the first vice chair of the Visual Effects Society. We're here today to talk about AI. In the past year, we've seen leaps and bounds with regard to what it can do. Early iterations definitely had some flaws, that creepy looking celebrity animation, cats with multiple paws, sprites birthing themselves out of nowhere. And how could we forget The Rock eating rocks and Will Smith eating spaghetti? It's definitely gotten much better. Some of the more recent outputs look like photography at first glance. And now we have Sora. The advancement's pretty significant, but it's still not quite there when it comes to photorealistic work. Everything, to me anyway, has kind of the same cinematic look. Something looks kind of off about it all at first glance. It's only when you look at the scenes over and over again that you pick out the oddity. AI still doesn't quite know what to do about hands and fingers, and sometimes people seem to glide while walking, and occasionally you catch people walking in unison. I think it's best at creating fantastical creatures and otherworldly environments where we don't really have a frame of reference. You can really be immersed in this fantastical world. This last scene kind of gets me. I think that if these folks were actually having a conversation, they might be making eye contact, and nobody really knows what to do with their hands. But when you compare it with where we were a year ago, phew, that was really fast. Way to get our attention, right? Thanks for being here today to learn more about machine learning, AI, and generative AI, and how it might be used now and in the future. A lot of us are feeling anxious about how quickly generative AI seems to be moving. Will I lose my job? Or will the adoption to AI make things in my job easier? In the dynamic field of visual effects, where innovation is the norm, embracing new technologies is inevitable. As mentioned, I was employee number 20-something at Digital Domain in 1993. I met my husband while he was rearranging virtual deck chairs on Titanic, and I was handing out camera lens info. Our daughter's middle name is Rose. So yeah, we're that nerdy family. I'm currently working in talent acquisition, and I've definitely seen some trends in technology. Human talent and storytelling, however, remain constant. As a quick reminder, here's an overview of visual effects technology to date. In the early years, visual effects relied heavily on in-camera practical techniques such as map paintings, forced perspective, elements shot at scale, models and miniatures, and opticals compositing. Animation actually started with hand-drawn painted cells, and live-action animation was often accomplished with stop motion. The digital age and computers brought about the green screen era, which leveraged advanced CG tools to composite actors into digitally created environments. At present, for some productions, we've returned to the get it in camera approach using virtual production workflow. Those require incredibly sophisticated visual effects technologies. Many of these tools and techniques utilize machine learning already, so AI feels like the next logical step. But will AI be used for creative purposes in production in the future? The answer is yes, but it depends on the situation. We saw some examples of early and awkward creative outputs utilizing generative AI, but we've also seen some pretty good stuff. But is it practical to use these images in production? One place that this could definitely be used on the creative side is for concept art. The artist can use this tool to visualize ideas for creature creation, environment, set design, and that sort of thing. These are ideas meant to inspire the final output. They are not the final output. An indie filmmaker with a limited budget could use AI-generated scenes in place of building a practical set or rendering out a full CG scene. As we will learn later, the ethical and legal implications of using a final AI-generated image in production are pretty complex. I think it's difficult to envision a tool like this used for creation of large-scale visual effects. I've tried to imagine a room full of prompters taking direction from a director. As we know, directors tend to pixel push, and our current workflow allows for a fair amount of variable tweaking. And you know what? We haven't seen under the hood what Sora really, how it really works. Like if we change the color of the astronaut's hat in the Sora scene, does that break everything else? What version of the prompt created this particular scene? And furthermore, can a prompt be copyrighted? I asked ChatGPT and it said, maybe. It might be more practical to use AI under the hood in visual effects workflow to automate repetitive tasks. Some areas that might be made more efficient by the use of AI tools include roto, tracking, animation tasks like in-betweening, motion capture data cleanup, and that sort of thing. AI can also be used to support administrative tasks like resource allocation, budgeting and forecasting, project management, client and stakeholder engagement, and more. LinkedIn is the primary tool in my recruiting arsenal, and I'm always being offered AI enhancements in my outreach letters and posts. The technology is not there. The recommendations are always incredibly cringy, but the tools are there and they're being built. All of these areas do require human oversight and lots of programming. These are some companies who are already using AI tools within their workflow. Usage includes many of the things mentioned on the previous slide, the automation of some animation tasks, maybe the animation of background characters, real-time rendering, of course, and texture painting, and the automation of repetitive tasks. Some studios use creative aspects of AI for concept work only. In all of these cases, AI is not replacing human artists. These tools are used to complement the efforts of the visual effects studios, freeing the artists up for more creative work. I got curious. What are the jobs for visual effects artists in AI? Most of my research turned up computer science-heavy job descriptions utilizing these titles. My instinct is that the artist jobs at the visual effects studios will pretty much stay the same, but the requirements might expand to allow for people who know how to use these AI tools. You would list it on your skill as a resume alongside Nuke, Maya, or Unreal. And now the million-dollar question, will I be replaced by an AI? Our jobs require a fair amount of human interaction, the interpretation of multiple social and emotional cues, and constant learning and adaptation. A machine could do that, but it would take a lot of time, and you'd still need a human to oversee it. Each job in visual effects can be distilled to a certain essence, which is a combination of the tools you use, your past experience, your artistic point of view, and most importantly, who you are as a person. If you take, for example, the job description of a matte painter, it's changed pretty dramatically over the years. Initially, the work was done on glass and with paint, and then came composite photography using optical techniques and multiple sources. Digital compositing was next, eventually expanding to add 3D projections and other elements to create movement. What's next? Elements of AI, perhaps? But the primary purpose of the job of a matte painter has stayed the same. A good matte painter must possess a firm grasp of perspective, lighting, and composition. Authentic artistry requires a human touch. So what's next? Our advice to you is to hang in there. To show you how not quite ready AI is to take our job, Barbara asked Midjourney to recreate the infamous kitten hang in there poster with the words change incoming. Change is coming. And this is the result. So I think we're okay for now. In an ever-evolving landscape, our ability to adapt and innovate will be our greatest asset. Together, we can navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead, ensuring our continued relevance and success in a world driven by technology. Continue learning and ask lots of questions. Knowledge is power. And with that, I turn the mic to our next speaker.
So hello, everyone. My name is Michele, and today I want to talk about navigating the AI and machine learning landscape for visual effects and animation. With new AI-based solutions coming up every day, discriminating between the ones that may be well-suited for adoption in visual effects and animation and which ones may not can be very challenging. Today, I would like to dwell on this challenge and talk about the AI landscape, introduce some basic definitions, present a framework for assessing machine learning solutions, explore a few categories of solutions, and share some closing remarks. The takeaway today is that even looking at AI applications in the specific VFX animation industry, the landscape is extremely broad and varied, and it is changing at an incredible speed. Some parts of this landscape are already very familiar to us and should not be seen as problematic at all. We have been building tools in those areas for a long time, and they continue to represent a huge opportunity for us going forward, while others are much more challenging to navigate, and we need to be aware of the perils that we may be facing when considering them. A little disclaimer, I will be mentioning a few specific technologies, but I want to be clear that I'm not endorsing or disapproving any of them. I just want to use them as examples to showcase the different types of solutions and how they differ from each other. Okay, a recent article from Ad Age indicates that there is a growing trend from multiple brands to restrict AI use. The UK government latest consultations regarding tax incentives for visual effects is suggesting that generative AI may not qualify for the additional credits. And many of our clients are concerned about AI and want to know if we use AI in our workflow. The problem is that we are quickly moving towards a world where some form of AI will be present in many parts of our workflow, from the assistants built in our email clients to advanced creative tools, and just referring to everything as AI is not going to be adequate. So let's start by looking at some basic definitions. AI, artificial intelligence, is the simulation of human intelligence in computers to perform tasks that typically require human knowledge. Machine learning is a subset of AI focused on solving tasks by a learning process, primarily from training data, from the training data set or from task repetition. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning, which uses neural network with multiple layers to learn patterns and representation of data. So far, these definitions don't really help us too much, as most of what we have seen in AI over the last few years is based on machine learning and specifically deep learning. An important distinction arises when we talk about generative AI or GenAI. By GenAI, we refer to a system that has been trained on massive data sets and can create new content such as text, code, music, but also a content which is at the heart of our industry, images, videos, and 3D models. This is the area that has probably caught our industry by surprise the most and is considered to be the most controversial and challenging. While this distinction between non-generative machine learning and GenAI is helpful, it is still not enough. As an example, let's consider a machine learning application that is very well established in our industry, which is render denoising. We're all familiar with the fact that producing a noise-free render with modern path tracing renderers can be computationally very expensive. And over the last few years, we have seen multiple solutions from Intel, NVIDIA, Pixar, and others tackling this problem very successfully with machine learning. All of these techniques rely on training a model using a large set of noisy and fully converged render pairs so that the system can learn how to generate a clean image starting from a noisy one. Let's now look for a moment at Stable Diffusion, which is one of the most common image generative AI solutions available today. The interesting part is that internally Stable Diffusion operates by iteratively removing noise over multiple steps and converging towards a noise-free image, driving the denoising process using the controls provided by the user, such as a text prompt. This is also based on a large data set of training data, in this case, a textual description of the image itself and the corresponding image. While render denoising is not something we would normally associate with generative AI and is not considered controversial in any way, at a high level, its internal process is not too dissimilar to Stable Diffusion's one, which is clearly identified as a generative AI solution. You could say that any studio adopting this kind of render denoising filtering is filtering every pixels with an AI solution, one that could arguably be considered generative AI. Where does this leave us if our clients are talking about restricting AI usage, even if they're just about restricting generative AI? In order to help us understand more clearly where a given solution sits in our AI landscape, it may be helpful to break things down into the high-level component that constitute a typical machine learning system. At a very high level, we have a training data set, which is used to build the model, which is then used in an application which provides certain functionality, and that application is run on a given infrastructure. Let's now look at each one of these in more detail, starting with a few important considerations related to the training data set. First of all, do we know what the origin of the data was that was used to train the model is? Sometimes this information is easily accessible in a data card that outlines where the data is coming from, how it was collected, transformed, as well as highlight any biases or other limitations with training data set. Other times this information is hard or fully impossible to find. Is the data gathered by scraping the public internet, or is it specifically generated for the project. If the system I am evaluating is using a third-party data set, is it licensed for commercial use? If copyright is included in the training set and used for training, do we know if copyright has been respected or not? Is it even possible to tell yet, given the legal question remain still unresolved about copyright? And considering the uncertainty we have from a copyright perspective at the moment, does the provider of the solution offer any indemnification in case of any copyright claims are made against you? Answering these questions about a specific AI solution can already help us understand if we are in a safe area of our landscape or not. Let's now look at the model itself. Sometimes the information we're looking for is available again in a model card, which explains the model's architecture, how it was trained and evaluated, and so on. Again, this also raises awareness of potential biases and fairness issues that might be part of the model's training data or design. There's an interesting trend between some of the big tech companies about open models versus closed ones. Companies like Meta have been spearheading the creation of open models. Others, like OpenAI, despite the name, do not generally provide access to their models. Others, like Google, have been providing a combination of open and closed models for different use cases. We also have examples where the models are available, but only licensed for non-commercial use. If we focus on how the model is trained, we also have to keep in mind that user-generated data and any corresponding feedback provided by the users may or may not be used as new training data set for further refinements of the model. Needless to say, this is a major confidentiality concern. In addition, a well-established method for improving the performance of some generative systems is what is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, which means that humans are part of the fine-tuning process, which has other obvious confidentiality implications. When we look at the application itself, is the application proprietary and only available within our studios, or is it publicly available either commercially or as an open source project? We should always make sure commercial licensing is available, particularly when dealing with open source projects. Finally, we already talked about whether the application can be considered generative AI or not. For evaluating the use of generative AI applications, we not only need to consider the data, the model, and application itself, but also how the software will be used. Some uses will be safe, others will create a high risk for the studio and ultimately the content owners. Finally, we want to check on which infrastructure is the application running. Can we run the application locally, maybe directly on our workstations or in our servers within our infrastructure, or is it only available as a public cloud system via a public API? As always, when we're looking at applications that require access to the internet, we need to consider how it fits within the MPA security guidelines and potentially have the solution cleared by our client security team. It is also interesting how some providers, such as AWS with their Bedrock product or NVIDIA with their AI Foundry, are providing turnkey solutions for running a variety of open models on their dedicated infrastructure, often providing a different licensing term from what you would have when running the model directly yourself. Now, if we combine all these considerations, we end up with a checklist that can help us with assessing if a given solution is suitable for our work or not. This list is not exhaustive, but and there are clearly other aspects to consider, but I hope it provides a good starting point. To keep it simple, we can distill it in 4 key areas for responsible governance: data provenance and copyright protection, commercial licensing, generative versus non-generative AI, confidentiality, and data security. Now, based on these characterizations, I would like to focus briefly on a few key areas in this landscape where we see clusters of solutions that are roughly positioned in the same space. I'll start with what I'll call here machine learning tools. This is just a continuation of our industry's strong tradition in incredible innovation aimed at improving the artist's efficiencies and enabling artists to produce the highest quality work possible. We see a couple of examples here. by Pixar on volumetric neural style transfer, and one by Digital Domain on their machine learning cloth project. Both of them nominees in this year's VS Emerging Technology Award. This type of innovation is driven by visual effects and animation studios or other software providers specifically focusing on our industry. Although some solution may be positioned slightly differently, in most cases, this type of work is based on proprietary data, building proprietary closed models only running within our studio infrastructure. I believe that this type of innovation represents a major opportunity for our industry, and it's important, in my opinion, that some of the broad concerns about AI do not prevent us from leveraging machine learning as an effective tool to empower our artists to produce better work and more efficiently so. We should all expect a lot of innovation in this space in the coming years. On the other end of the spectrum, we have generative and image and video AI. These are often based on large public data set, mostly obtained by crawling the internet. Although this is not always the case, and there are some noticeable exceptions, such as Adobe with its Firefly line of generative solutions, which are trained on specifically only on licensed content or public domain content where copyright has expired. This seems to be a rare exception, though, and it's clear that some other models have been trained on copyrighted materials, including some frames from some of the movies many of us here have been working on. These solutions are mainly available via third-party cloud services, which is not always easy to integrate in a way that is compatible with MPA security guidelines. Overall, the adoption of these solutions raises multiple concerns: copyright, confidentiality, data security. So if you're working on a feature film or TV series and are considering adoption of any of these solutions, my suggestion would be to check with your client before any adoption, making sure you describe how you plan to use the system. While some may be perfectly fine with it, I expect that for others it will be a non-starter, at least for now, until the legal picture is a lot clearer. This kind of innovation has so far been driven externally to our industry or by new entrants to our industry, primarily big tech companies, due to the huge compute costs necessary to train those foundational models. Needless to say, this is already disrupting some parts of our workflow. And while in the short to medium term, some of the considerations I made here may slow down adoptions, these technologies have the potential to disrupt things even further, particularly in some segments, possibly creating entire new segments along the way. And it's clear that innovation will continue in this field at a very fast pace. I would like to mention specifically image generative AI solution Stable Diffusion. The main differentiator here is that this solution has been provided as an open model, which has created a whole new segment. This led to some incredible opportunities for integration of GenAI directly into the DCCs we are already using. The potential for some very interesting and powerful new workflow is clearly there, but the major copyright concerns are present too. Another interesting aspect of Stable Diffusion specifically is that there is a thriving community working on custom models, often referred to as LoRa's. These are tailored to produce a very specific type of content. The very nature of these community-created models is also quite challenging from a copyright perspective. I expect that the community will continue to explore and produce very interesting results using Stable Diffusion or its many variants. But in the short to medium term, many of our clients will likely not be comfortable with its adoption in our workflow. So again, we need to make sure they are aligned if we want to use something like this. There are major court cases against some of these providers, and the outcome of those cases will clearly influence the adoption trajectory for these solutions. They may slow down adoption even further, in which case I expect we will see a creation of more bespoke, commercially safe models, or perhaps open the floodgates, leading to a fast and broad adoption. I have been referencing commercial licensing multiple times. The reason for that is that machine learning has been incredibly open so far. Not only published, all innovation is published openly, but more often than not, it's coming with an open source reference implementation. Makes it very easy for anyone to showcase incredible state-of-the-art results, particularly in such a hyped industry as AI is at the moment. But having a license to use that software commercially may not be possible. There are some interesting cases where an application is provided open source with a very permissive license for commercial use, but digging deeper, it's clear that the application may use a model which is only distributed for non-commercial use, or going one level deeper, the model may also be distributed with a permissive license, but the data set that the model has been built with is only distributed for non-commercial use. Needless to say, these kind of scenarios can be quite difficult to navigate. It's clear we should expect the same trend of fast-paced innovation to continue for the foreseeable future, given the incredible amount of investments in machine learning. But we should operate carefully when considering adoption of this kind of open research projects in our workflow. While I hope this conversation might help exploring the broad AI landscape, it's clear that understanding which parts are safe to use and which ones are not remains still a difficult task. It seems to me that we have an opportunity as an industry, and maybe as the AI industry as a whole, to establish a more standardized governance framework to easily understand where each solution is placed and how to be more responsible in how we manage risk, both for us and our clients. I feel that the work that the Creative Commons has done to simplify licensing models might be a good reference for what may be needed here. What they did for licensing is to start by identifying core aspects that are relevant from a licensing perspective and establish easy to understand guidance around them. They then established a few well-understood presets for common licensing combinations. When an application is released under CC BY or CC BY NC, for instance, it's very clear for anyone considering those kind of solutions what the implications might be. Taking a similar approach here, but this time focusing on all the aspects I discussed today, from data provenance and copyright protection, all the way through to confidentiality and data security, could be an interesting future development and maybe something for the VS Technology Committee to look into further. Thank you.
All right, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, success. All right. All right, so, and again, I love Michelle's topic. It segues nicely into what my presentation is going to be this morning. And before we get started, I would like to at least, why are we here? What's the purpose? And I got an old friend of mine to come and do a quick little video to explain why we're doing this.
My friend, we are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
And that's why we are here, to explain the mysterious, the unexplainable, and also to, most importantly, to talk about the future. So I love this quote from Arthur C. Clarke, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And you wonderful VFX artists, you create magic, but as an attorney, I can't deal with magic. I have to deal with the with what's really going on, what the laws really provide. And besides, I think I flunked out the second year at Hogwarts, so I can't really call myself a magician. Though I think some people out there would look at attorneys as being part of the dark arts. I am not that, but you know, like I said, as an attorney, I have to deal with what I see the laws provide, and so. Let's talk about some of the issues that are involved, legal issues that are involved in AI. So we're talking about protection, all right? Can you protect AI-generated content and AI-generated, any kind of AI-generated work? And Can it be protected by copyright? Can it be protected by patent? We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. Then we're also dealing with trade secrets. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection between AI and trade secrets. Then, of course, there's the issue of infringement, which, again, Michele talked very much about in his presentation. We'll briefly talk about it. I'm not going to get into the weeds about the various different cases. Right now, there are about over 20 copyright infringement cases that are involved in artificial intelligence. All are very much in the early stages, and so it's not a whole lot that we can talk about. And then we're going to talk about publicity rights. All right, the actual, in many respects, the actors, physical actors, and how their images are being used and generated by AI in motion pictures, television, in the arts. So let's go back. Probably the last time a lot of people here who are attending this webinar talk about the U.S. Constitution was probably in your high school civics class. So the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, we call it the Intellectual Property Clause today. Obviously, the Founding Fathers didn't call it that, but this is basically the nub of protection in the United States. And the section says, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. This is where the U.S. Copyright Act and the U.S. Patent Act, they all derive from this particular section of the U.S. Constitution. So we were talking about copyright and artificial intelligence, and the U.S. Copyright Office recently issued what they call guidance. And this is a summary here of a guidance that dealing with works that contain material generated by artificial intelligence. The nub of this situation is that if any particular work is substantially created by artificial intelligence, it can't be protected by copyright, right? It's precluded from copyright protection because it's not created, it's not human generated. So the question comes down to is the entire, if part of the work was created by artificial intelligence, does that mean the entire work can't be protected by copyright? That's not the case. That portion of the work that was generated by artificial intelligence, it would not be protected by copyright, but any part of that work that was human created could be. And so this is just gives you a general overview of the guidance from the U.S. Copyright Office dealing with protecting works that are generated by artificial intelligence. What is required by the U.S. Copyright Office is when you submit a copyright application that in some way for a work that is whole and or part generated by artificial intelligence, you have to disclose what portion was created by the artificial intelligence and what portion was human created, if at all. And this gives the, at least, you gotta give a brief explanation as to what parts are which. And then obviously the U.S. Copyright Office is going to determine, what portion, if any, can be protected by copyright. So there've been at least two instances where copyright applications included works that were whole and part generated by artificial intelligence, and they both had two different types of outcomes. First case is the Zarya of the Dawn, which is a comic, a graphic comic, where the images were created by artificial intelligence, particularly Midjourney. And what happened was a copyright application, copyright registration was granted on this work originally, but then the Copyright Office reversed its decision and then canceled the copyright registration, principally on the grounds that the graphic images were created by artificial intelligence, which they said was not human created and therefore was precluded from copyright protection. But what happened in this particular case is the author had some elements that were human created. And essentially what it was the text of the comic book and the arrangement and placement of the images in the comic book. So what happened is the U.S. Copyright Office issued a new copyright registration that basically protected this work, but only to the text, only to the arrangement and placement of the images as a compilation. But again, this was an important situation where the actual graphic images themselves were not protected because, again, they weren't human created. The other copyright involved what was for a work that's called Theater d'Opera Spatiale. Now, maybe Michele can tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong, but in English, it meant space opera theater. This work, again, the U.S. Copyright Office Review Board rejected this application on the ground that the work itself was substantially created by artificial intelligence, and that there was very little, if any, human authorship involved in this particular work. And again, what happened in this case is there were 600 prompts that were used to generate these images through Midjourney. Adobe Photoshop was used to correct any flaws in the particular image, and then Gigapixel AI was used to enlarge and clean up the images as they enlarge this particular work. So again, as opposed to Zara of the Dawn, where there were some elements of the comic book that were protected by copyright, here in this particular work, since it was wholly generated by artificial intelligence, it was not protected, and therefore a copyright registration was denied. So that was on the copyright side. On the U.S. patent side, we have the same particular issue here as in copyrights, where if the invention is significantly or wholly created by artificial intelligence, no patent will issue. But then the question comes down to is there any particular part that word was human authored or human created or human invented? Then they have to get into the weeds and try to determine what's going on here. And so it's again, not only in the United States, but in Europe, generally, if you have an invention that is significantly created by artificial intelligence, no patent will issue. With the exception that South Africa is the first country to have issued a patent on an invention that was created by artificial intelligence. So if you have an invention in this particular context, rush to South Africa and see if you can get it patented. But in the United States and Europe and other countries that have dealt with this issue in a similar vein, you have an issue with regards to whether it's patentable in the first place. And of course, the issue is, at the USPTO, nobody knows you're a dog. The same situation is at the USPTO, nobody knows that you're created by artificial intelligence. However, as with copyrights, you have to disclose, what portion was created by artificial intelligence. So at least to give the U.S. Patent Office at least a heads up as to how they're going to deal with this. So that's the issue on protectability. Now we switch over to infringement. And the issue here is the generative AI requires the input of large amounts of information, data, and images from numerous sources, some including third-party intellectual property. So the issue is that AI developers are unable to assess where all this data comes from and cannot guarantee that the outputs are risk-free of infringement. And that's one of the big hallmarks with some of these cases, the early cases that are being filed today. Because again, is the infringement the input, the prompts that you put in, or is the infringement starts where it's outputted by artificial intelligence, or is it both? And some of these issues right now are being determined. A lot of courts in some of the very, very early cases had struck down or dismissed some of these cases, principally on the ground that they said, plaintiff, show me where there's an infringement, right? Everything else is speculative, but show me where there's a one-on-one infringement. And so a lot of some of the early cases where these infringements matters have been dismissed. Now, again, there's still 20 other cases pending right now. And like they're all in the early stages, have been filed only within the last few months. And so it's really hard right now to discern where the courts are going in these early stages. And we won't know for at least, several more months, if not years, how these infringement actions will take place. But it still comes down to the issue as with all this large data that's out there, that's been scanned through all the internet and anything else. Ultimately, is there some issue potentially of copyright infringement that may be occurring at some point? And we'll see how the courts deal with that. The other issue deals with trade secret misappropriation. And again, not so much litigation here, but this is another area where everyone has to be extremely careful about, because entering prompts that disclose trade secret information is the issue. Because now, if you input any information that could be considered trade secrets of your employers, that information is now in ChatGPT. All right, it is no longer confidential. It's now with some other third party in which the employer has no control. So some examples are pasting confidential source code into the chat to check for errors. All right, that information, the source code is certainly not only potentially copyrightable, but at the same time, it's clearly a confidential business information. Well, now it's in ChatGPT. It's no longer confidential because some other third party, now has it in their database. Another example of sharing code with ChatGPT, requesting code optimization. The same issue applies here. The code is confidential. It's trade secret. And you put that code, that line of code or lines of code into ChatGPT. Now ChatGPT has it in its database, right? Is it confidential now? Has it lost its confidentiality? That's a big issue. And another example is sharing a recording of a meeting to convert into notes for a presentation, right? The recording of the meeting will have discussions of issues that could be of confidential business information, business plans. And now you put that recording on ChatGPT and it's, no longer in the control of the employer. It's now with some other third source. So did it lose its confidentiality? Those are major issues that are going on, particularly with and especially with VFX companies, where almost everything you guys do is either protected by copyright or clearly is a trade secret. Finally, we're dealing with publicity rights. Again, I represent a lot of celebrities, both alive and dead. And this is an issue that's becoming more and more of a concern to the clients. And so as expected, a number of states many states have right of publicity statutes. Some of them deal with what we call post-mortem rights of deceased celebrities, deceased personalities. And at least 2 states right now, one actually passed and had a right publicity statute substantially amended in Tennessee, and the other one, California, recently had a bill that was put into the state legislature. So we'll talk about the Tennessee Act, the Tennessee Elvis Act. It provides that for musicians and artists with additional layer of protection for their voices and songs from AI generative cloning models and services. It defines voice as a sound in a medium that is readily identifiable and attributable to a particular individual, regardless of whether the sound contains the actual voice or simulation of the voice of the individual. And it prohibits distribution, transmission, or creation of an algorithm, software tool, or other technology service or device with the primary purpose of function to produce an individual's photograph, voice, or likeness without the individual's authorization. So this act was signed by the governor of Tennessee, I think about 2 weeks ago. And so I believe it's the first state in the nation to actually grapple with artificial intelligence in this particular area. As I mentioned before, California, there's a AB 1836. This is just a bill that was recently entered filed with the California State Legislature. So it's not an actual law yet. It still, has to be debated, and I'm sure there'll be substantial attempts to amend it. But this so far is what AB 1836 is calling for. It adds a liability for unauthorized uses of a digital replica of a deceased personality in an audiovisual work or sound recording in any manner related to the work performed by the deceased personality while living, without regard to whether the replica is used on a product or service. And it defines digital replica as a simulation of the voice or likeness of an individual that is readily identifiable as the individual and is created using digital technology. So again, this is just a recent bill. Again, some early criticism is defining what a digital replica is and what a simulation is. So it's still early to tell how and what the end result of this bill, whether it'll be passed at all, and if it does pass, is what it'll look like at that point in time. And of course, recently, with regards to the SAG-AFTRA strike, as everyone has read in the trades, a significant portion of the new agreement deals with artificial intelligence, and we're going to talk a little bit about that briefly here. So the SAG-AFTRA TV theatrical agreement kind of breaks down these kind of artificial intelligence created performers into 4 basic categories. One is a digital alteration, and that refers to the revision of an actor's work in photography or a soundtrack previously recorded by the performer. The other one is the employment-based digital replicas. And again, this is created with an actor and the employment and the employer. And it basically is this is where the actor is, the image is scanned into a computer and to be used by artificial intelligence to create these particular type of replicas. Then we have the independently created digital replicas. And again, it's created without the actor's participation in a movie or TV show, particularly if that actor wasn't even involved in the particular work at all. So again, this is one other area. And then we have the absolute synthetic performers, and it's a wholly digital reproduction. There appears to be a person, but does not resemble any recognizable actor and is not voiced by the actor themselves. So this is how, and all this really depends on these particular divisions of replicas, digitally created replicas. Really depends on whether an actor has the consent, has to get consent, whether studio or streaming service has to get consent, and really how they get paid. So these are, and again, since the contract is relatively new, I think it's only been entered in since November. There's really not a whole lot right now that I'm aware of that we can have further discussion on this, but this is just something to look at, particularly with regards to how you deal with performers from the SAG-AFTRA union. And I think with that, we're I'm done with that. So.
Hi everybody, my name is Andrew Glassner. The previous speakers have done simply a marvelous job of laying out the landscape and many of the issues. So I would like to go into some of the side issues and related topics without diving into the technology, because that's already been so well established. So I'm going to start just with the very idea of the term AI, which I don't like, because AI expands to artificial intelligence, neither word of which really has much meaning for us. Computer programs, they're all artificial. There's nothing special about these. And they're in no way intelligent. These systems are no more intelligent than an encyclopedia. They're repositories of information. But there is an alternative expansion of AI that I like, which is abstracted information, because that describes what these things do. What they do is they take information that we provide them during training, and they transform that into an abstracted representation with an enormous amount of structure. And it's that structure in the abstraction that gives them all this power that allows them to analyze things, remove things, generate new things. So the real power in these things, calling them AI, calling them artificial intelligence doesn't help. But thinking of it as information that has been abstracted and structured helps a lot because it gives us a context for what these things do. Now, the only reason why this works out is because it turns out, to everyone's surprise, the world is incredibly well described by statistical composites. Now, everybody knew that there were statistical representations of things, but nobody expected that, or virtually nobody expected, that things from such diverse fields as the shapes and the textures of trees and puppies and the faces of people and boats and cities and oceans and the motion of ocean waves and weather all had so much statistical information embedded in them that if we learned the statistics, we could generate more instances of all of these things that were perceptually indistinguishable from the source information. That was amazing. No one expected it, and that was the great shock and surprise of artificial intelligence. In fact, in the early days, people were talking about the fact that there was a curse of dimensionality, that as these models got to be too big, they would become useless because of the vast amount of statistics they had to memorize. People were concerned that if you looked at those statistics here just in 3D, but in these models, there are hundreds or thousands of dimensions, which we can't draw a picture of, but in 3D, that we would just get a mush of data points. They would just be all over the place and we wouldn't be able to extract much meaning. To our surprise, that's not the case. So here in 3D, instead of getting points everywhere in 3 dimensions, they all lie on this wrinkly surface. All the faces, they're not described by points in every place of the high dimensional space in which we abstract the information. They all lie on this surface. So we can pick points on the surface and we can draw lines or curves between points in the surface. And we can find clusters of points on the surface of high density or sparseness. And so it's this structure that gives us all the power of AI. Without that, we would have been sunk. And nobody, again, nobody, hardly anyone, expected that there would be this kind of structure. This was the great surprise. The structure is called the latent space. And latent refers to the fact that the interpretation of this as the structure was already in the data, just waiting to be discovered. So it was there, but not seen. It was latent. And so we call it the latent space. So let's think about your renderer, the renderer at your studio. It's a scanline renderer, it's a path tracer. Is that artificial intelligence? Well, let's see what the flow is of the renderer. It begins with human beings who sit down and, write code. When they're all done, they have produced a program. Now, someone comes along later and provides that program with an abstract representation of what they want it to do. Maybe it's a USD file. Maybe it's some other text file, but it is an abstraction. And the abstraction is given to the program. The program massages the abstraction and produces the output that we want, a pretty cat. Now, let's push this into a field into a form that we might recognize as AI, or we might call AI. It begins the very same way. The programmer writes code. Okay, now we have a new step. We produce training data. Here it's fruits and vegetables of different sizes and shapes and colors, and we use that training data to modify the code, but we don't change the code itself, right? The data structures, the subroutines, the functions of the code, the actual text of the program is not changed. I mean, there are exceptions, but generally in all the systems we use, it is not changed. What is changed are the values of the floating point numbers that are used in the calculation. These are called the weights. And so this process of learning from the training data just sets the values of thousands or millions of floating point numbers, the weights. Now that we have the identical code that was produced by the programmer, but with specific values for the floating point numbers, someone comes along with an abstract representation of what they want. Maybe it's a USD file, maybe it's a text prompt, maybe it's a picture. And they say, please make this for me. It goes into the code, and the code produces, cats in space. It's important to note that the code is not modified by this process. Now, there are examples of code that changes when it's given a prompt. There are a famous example is Microsoft's Tay, which was released to the world and quickly adopted undesirable characteristics in response to the prompts and things that people were saying to it. Typically, the code stays the same, and it only changes when it's updated remotely. So when you talk to your phone and you say, hey, where's a coffee shop? And it tells you, and then you say, oh, but what are the directions to get there? The code did not change after you ask for the coffee shop and you ask for directions. It's static. The code is static, the weights are static, but they're updated when the company pushes a new version to you. So this is the new step, the learning step, the training step. But notice that the other steps are unaffected. In particular, the output of the training is this code in the bottom left that takes an abstract representation and produces a picture. So this part is the same as it was in the first slide of looking at the renderer. So is this generative AI? I don't know. It all comes down to what is the origin of the code in the bottom left. It's like buying a vase in the store. Was this made by, a machine that folds clay, or was this made by a human potter? I don't know. You have to look at the description. Without that, all you have is code that takes an abstract representation and produces a picture. So you can't just say that's generative AI. So let's think about what is AI. And Michele did a great job of laying out all the pieces, so I'm able to skip that. And I'll just look at the very high level overview of what these systems can do. They're basically, when we're talking about what is AI, here are all the things we're used to all the time, right? We do this stuff, inverse kinematics and denoising, polygon smoothing, color correction. These are programs that are doing sophisticated processing based on what we want them to do. How is that not AI? I mean, maybe they had training data in them, maybe they didn't, but there's no clear dividing line. People love to throw around this term, and particularly when it gets into legal circles, which Stephen referred to, where's that line between, yeah, that was done by a person and that is AI? You could perfectly well say that all these things are AI. So here are the three things that AI systems are able to do. With respect to their data. They're able to compress it, interpolate it, and extrapolate it. So let's look at what these things mean. Here's compression, working left to right. Now, in this case, I didn't do anything interesting. I just, averaged little squares. So there was no domain knowledge. I didn't have to know anything about what the picture is. There are compression techniques that do use domain knowledge, and they're very useful. The JPEG compression standard knows about the human visual system, and it's able to compress pictures by throwing away information that we are not sensitive to. The MP3 compression standard is great for music because it has built into the program, into the compressor, knowledge about the human auditory system, and it can throw away information that is not relevant to what we care about when we listen to audio. So you can absolutely use domain information during compression. You don't have to, as in this example, but usually in machine learning, we do. We learn how to compress information as compactly as possible. Once we've compressed it, of course, we want to decompress it. So this is where we absolutely need domain knowledge. Look at the picture in the middle. What is that? Is that a hot air balloon? Is that a puppy who got into some blue paint? Is it a fish leaping out of the ocean? I don't know. It could be any of those things. There's no way for the system to know. We have to tell it what we want. We have to give it information to guide it. And then it needs source knowledge. So if we say, well, system, that picture in the middle is a face, it can say, oh, all right, then the pink splotch in the middle, it's probably the face itself. And then the yellow stuff is probably some sort of clothing, and it can generate some sort of picture on the left. If we start all the way on the right, just that brown box, it could be almost anything that averages out to a brown box. This even applies to things like diffusion models that Michele was showing us. If you start with a sea of noise, without domain knowledge, you just get another sea of noise. If you want that sea of noise to turn into something recognizable, like, I don't know, a shark in a tank, you have to tell it that's what you want. So that's compression and decompression. The next thing that they can do, the second of three things, is interpolation. So here are some frames from a real video. I could have used AI, but this is a real video of a pole vaulter. And I can ask, what happens there in the gap? So that's interpolation. And remember, I was talking about that surface. You can draw two dots and you can find a curve or a line between them. That's what this does. And so an AI system that interpolates finds the missing piece of data. And maybe it would be this. Finally, we can extrapolate. Extrapolate means predict the future. And computers are no better at this than we are. They're better sometimes in some ways, but we're better sometimes in some ways. So if we ask it to extrapolate this movie, it might give us something reasonable, like the pole vaulter being very happy at success. But, you know, it could give us a bouquet of flowers. They're both perfectly reasonable extrapolations, but one is what we want and one isn't what we want. Predicting the future is hard. Predicting any data from a given data set is hard as well. So these systems are really safe when they're used for interpolation. You get more and more risky the further and further you extrapolate. So let's talk about how we use these statistics. Suppose that you are working for a client and they are a high-end client. That means they want your output to be directable, right? They know what they have in mind. That is, they have a specific idea, or in some cases, they don't have the idea, but they have a specific reaction. They'll know it when they see it, right? And they ask for many iterations until they see the one they want. But either way, it's not a generic, it's a specific. And so if the script calls for a cat, the generative AI system says, no trouble, here's a cat. And we show it to our soup, or we show it to our art director or a director, and they go, no, not that cat. And the generative AI system says, okay, fine, I'll just give you more cats. I'll give you as many cats as you like. And we don't want that. We want this cat. This is the one the director wants. So how do we tell the generative AI system that's the cat we want? Well, I suppose you could write a prompt, but if you really cared about the detailed specifics of this cat and where the stripes are, you know, I mean, we know people are very concerned about getting exactly what they want. So if the director or the art director or the supervisor, whoever it is, says, no, you know, the stripes on its head are not symmetrical enough, how long is that text prompt going to be? It's going to become a novel. So you might alternatively hire an artist or draw a picture of the cat or build a 3D model, but that doesn't tell the system how it moves, how it twitches its tail, exactly how it, you know, how it wiggles its ears, or just how and when it blinks its eyes. Describing all of that, describing what you want to a generative AI program is incredibly hard. It's the problem of being implicit versus explicit. We are almost always implicit in our communications. Suppose that you have a script and it says we have a sophisticated person in a modern, you know, in New York City, say, they're walking down the street and they pull out their cell phone and we hand that to the modeling department. What do? Well, you know, that definition is enough. There's enough context, enough world information. We all have experience with these things. They'll make something like that, you know, with variations, but we all know what a well-to-do person in a modern Western civilization is gonna do when they pull out their cell phone. We know what it looks like. But computers don't have that information. They didn't grow up. They haven't been watching movies and television and stuff the way we have. And so they don't understand that. We have to tell them every last detail to get the one we want, not a generic, the one we want. And this can be exhausting. This can take more work, more time, more energy than just modeling the darn thing. Now, this may change over time, but this is where we are now. And this is a major problem because people care about getting the specific thing they want, and that specific requires being explicit. Try asking a 5-year-old to, open a can of corn with a can opener, mechanical can opener, that's going to take an hour. No, honey, hold it like this. Okay, now push. No, push a little harder. Oh, no, too hard, too hard. Oh my gosh. Being explicit about instructions is very hard. So let's take a step back and talk about this whole ethical dilemma we have with training AI, which Stephen so nicely addressed and Susan referred to. What are we doing? Why do we have this problem about the provenance of the source data and who's been indemnified and the copyright holders being compensated? How did this happen? What is the source of this ethical dilemma? Well, here's what I think happened. I think we began with academic research. So all of these AI systems began with people, doing work in academia and publishing papers. Here's an example of a famous data set that we used in the early days called Celeb-A. And it's pictures of famous celebrities that were scraped off the web and tagged with their names. And we all use this to learn what faces look like. And that's great as long as we're academics and we're just publishing papers. We get paid by our institution, but we're not getting paid by the journals for publishing it, and we're not getting paid by anybody else. So when we published the models, when we published all the information, we gave away everything. That was the point. We wanted other people to be able to replicate all the details. We would give you a link to the training data. We would give you the weights in a model, all the information you needed to replicate. We told you every variable, every meta variable. We told you exactly what optimizer we used, how we initialized it. Everything was there so that other people could replicate the thing. And famously, it was still hard to replicate it because they were very twitchy, and you would have to run these things repeatedly to get them to converge. But often they did, and by having access to all the information, it was useful. This is just like in the early days of building web pages, right? The way we all learned how to make web pages was by looking at the page source of the HTML. This is before it became crazy JavaScript and so on. But in the early days, you would say, oh, that's a pretty web page. How'd you make that? Look at the source. There was the HTML. You go, oh, and now that became part of your bag of tricks. So this was the world of academia. Everything was given away. Then something happened. Money. Someone said, oh, let's take this thing from academia and sell it. And now we crossed a red line. We pole vaulted over a fence or over a giant wall that should never have been crossed. And either people weren't paying attention or they were paying attention and didn't care. But people now did the wrong thing. They took these academic exercises that were based on freely available data, because that's okay when you're an academic, and they started selling it back to us without compensation to the people who created the source data. And that was the problem. So once that happened, the follow-on effect after people started screaming, hey, you're stealing my data, is that instead of giving away all the information, it all got locked down. So, of course, there's still academic papers being published with all the resources, but the big models from the big companies, well, they publish papers, but the papers are coy and they're vague and they don't tell us all the information we need. They just present the statistics and tell us how wonderful they are, which is a sad state of affairs. And that's led to this huge question of what is ethical and where do these models get their data? I personally, the way I see it is, the question is, can we put the genie back in the bottle? Can we get these unethical models to be ethical? And I think it's too late to put the genie back in the bottle. I think it probably we could have a couple of years ago. But I think right now there's just too much money, just given the practicalities of, the way at least the American culture works and the way the American political system works. I think there's just too much money. I would love to be wrong. I would love to see laws passed to rein these things in, and in fact, to make them illegal and say, if you're going to sell this thing, you have to clearly be using ethical sources of information. But I suspect that ship has sailed, which is really disappointing. So let's talk about where we are going. I think we're going towards omni-replacement for one thing. Here's a scene from the play A Chorus Line, where the woman on the left is singing about the fact that there's a song called Dance 10, Looks 3, where she says, when I audition, my card, I'm given a 10 for my dancing ability, but they don't like the way I look. And I get a 3 and I don't get the job. So I went to a plastic surgeon. This is the song. I went to a plastic surgeon. He rebuilt my body and now I get the jobs. And she basically implores you to do the same thing because then you'll get your jobs. Well, now we can do exactly what she wants, right? Of course, we can replace her body. We can actually replace anything. We change the faces of the people behind her, change their clothing, change their poses, take them out entirely, put in different people, take out the orchestra at the bottom, put in a jazz band. We can replace anything. And we will. The technology already exists to do most of these things, and it will only become easier and more accessible. We're already making people younger and older. We're already, to some extent, changing the lighting. It will just become easier. We're already changing the composition. And if a director says, yeah, I like the shot, but I wish the camera had been rotated so it was over here instead. And let's say you need now background that had never been built. No worries, we can do that. We'll move the camera, resynthesize all the actors, get the lighting right. Sure, we can move the camera around after the fact, or change the lighting, of course. We can change the timing. We've been doing this since forever, but we can do it in a smooth and fluid way so that if someone's raising the eyebrow, all the other muscles respond in the right way. Because, I mean, there are fast muscles and slow muscles. And so, you know, if you raise your eyebrow, the fast muscles change one way, the slow muscles change another way. You don't just retime the frame, you have to sort of restructure what happens in the face. And we will be able to do that. And ultimately, we'll be able to redo the entire acting scenario to the point where a person's performance is nothing more than a suggestion to the visual effects house for a starting point for what the performance ought to be. We'll have assistants that make all this possible. And of course, we have assistants now for all these tasks like segmentation and roto and mocap cleanup. And again, are those AI? Are they illegal? Because, you know, our client says no AI? I mean, it's hard to say just because we're using cleanup, you know, suddenly now we're using AI and we can't do that. Right? So it's mushy. This is the originator of osteopathy dictating his notes to his assistant. And these assistants were brilliant, right? They know your style. They know what's important to you. They know what to emphasize and what to leave out. They are highly adaptive and they can do a tremendous amount of work for you. And then, of course, you can override anything. And this will be of great value to us going forward. What are the downsides of these systems? Well, for one thing, we lose entry-level jobs. And this is a problem. Entry-level jobs are the way studios get new blood. It's the way they get new ideas. And it's the way they get challenges to what they've been doing because people come in and they have new ideas. It's also bad for those people because it's when you're a junior person that you make mistakes, that you grow, you mature, you learn, you find a mentor, and you learn how things work. And in fact, that's huge. Institutional knowledge gets lost when you don't have entry-level jobs that let you learn things like, here's where the files are, here's how we use them, here's why we do it that way. If all you can do is come in as a mid-level or senior person, we've got trouble because no one comes out of school as a mid-level or senior person. And no one comes out of school knowing all the quirks and idiosyncrasies of your studio because, oh, 10 years ago for a show, you know, we had to do this funny thing with the data. So there's this quirk in our pipeline. You know, you're a senior person. You're supposed to be highly efficient. You can't get boggled down by this stuff. So the loss of entry-level jobs, I mean, there's a reason that we've traditionally had, you know, people who come into a job at an entry level. First, they're an apprentice and then a journeyman, and they work their way up to master. We do the same thing. You know, you come in as an intern, you come in as a junior. There's a reason for that progression. It's not only good for the studio, it's good for the people. And it's problematic to lose that. On the other hand, these tools like GenAI and all the Midjourney tools and so forth that Michele was talking about let people gather all kinds of interesting experience that they otherwise would not have been able to. So let's talk about some of the upsides. We save time and money, so capitalism is happy. But really what matters to me is that the artists are happy. We are now freeing up the artists to be artists. You know, the thing they went to school for, the thing they wanted to do for a living, the thing we hired them to do. This now frees them up to, they're not spending their day painting out wires. You know, they're being creative artists, which is, after all, what we want from them. So I see these tools pulling visual effects in two directions. Let's say that you're working on a very low budget piece. Maybe it's a TikTok video, or it's just meant for cell phones, or, you know, it's something with a low budget. And let's say the establishing shot is a saloon in old, you know, Western US, the traditional Western saloon. So you go to your GenAI system and you say, make me a saloon. And maybe you like what you get, maybe you don't. You push the button a few times, it makes 5 pictures. You go, yeah, number 4, good enough, moving on. So that's great, right? That costs almost no money, it takes almost no time. You've got your establishing shot, moving on. So generative AI is really great for those use cases at a low level, and it will enable people making the indies and all these other short forms and low, let's say low frame rate, low resolution forms. They'll be able to work more quickly and more cheaply. At the high end, assistance will let us do ever better and more efficient, super high quality work, because we will be able to work at a higher level of abstraction. And we'll be able to say to our systems, oh, you know, that's not moving quite the way I want. Why don't you take a look at this thing I did last week? Can you make it the same? Boom, it can do it. So these high level assistants will enable us to do ever more subtle and sophisticated work. And they get rid of the implicit versus explicit problem, because we give them enough information that they have enough information that we can speak to them implicitly without all the explicit data. So wrapping up, where are we going? We're going to lots of great new places. Visual effects studios are masters of visual communication, and particularly photoreal, but with variations. We're great at that. So once the prices come down and the speed goes up by virtue of these AI tools, the human element that we add will become an enormous draw, because everyone will have access to the tools, but they won't be able to make that great quality. We can, because of our expertise, and we will be in demand from all kinds of fields like video gaming and interactive entertainment. There will be all sorts of other organizations that will want us. I think one really exciting place we can go is into expanding our sensorium, what's called our Umwelt, the range of stuff that we can perceive. Dogs can smell things that we have absolutely no idea is going on, right? You walk with your dog and your dog knows stuff that you have absolutely no access to. But we are visually dominant. And so with our visual communication skills, we can map that information to our dominant visual sense. And we'll have some visual sense of what our dog is able to smell. And this is extendable across all the sensoria. There are birds that can see colors we can't see. Sharks are sensitive to electromagnetic fields that we are not sensitive to. All of those things can be mapped with taste and our artistry to our visual fields, where they will be perceptible. And the upshot of this is that it will enhance our ability to communicate with one another and our ability to communicate with other living things, and ultimately find deeper connection between ourselves and everything else in the universe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. What great, great presentations. Given the time, I'm going to go directly to audience questions. Andrew, you were describing how academics had effectively hoovered up information and then gave it away along with some statistical learnings, but access to that data in a commercial context crosses a very bright red line. I think, Michele, it was you who mentioned Firefly as being one of the ethical options for both commercial and studio use. Are there others out there? And this is maybe a question for you, Stephen, also about infringement laws that may come down the road. Like, do we really know that it's truly ethical?
You start with me. I don't know of any other major commercial systems that carry the kind of guarantee over their sources that Firefly does. To my knowledge, they're unique among the major commercial services.
I know that there were talks about Getty Images developing their own solutions and things like that, but I'm not aware also of any other specific solution already being available on the market beyond Firefly.
You know, as far as issues of copyright infringement or any kind of infringement, again, it's still too early to tell. There are some platforms that at least claiming that all their stuff is licensed. And you can go to them and maybe at least have an issue, or at least have some comfort that, you know, there's less risk for infringement. I don't think there's ever total free risk of infringement. Even with Getty Images, there's a lot of issues sometimes where you don't know where they get their photographs from. So, you know, again, it's a brave new world, or wild, wild west, however you want to call it. And it's going to be a while before, you know, the dust settles out and try to figure this all out.
Thanks. Do we know, and maybe Michele, you know this, with Firefly, do you have the ability, like, or any of these tools, to deactivate after, you know, if you use it and you're creating source data, you're generating new data, do you have the ability to deactivate their use after the fact?
I don't know. I have to be honest. What do you mean by deactivate after the
This
fact?
is, and I should say, this is an audience question. This is a follow-up audience question. I think the idea is that, yeah, if you can license the use of this software and you're uploading your own source images and you're iterating against that data, do you have the ability to, you know, sort of ice it afterwards?
I don't know. This is all
Good
very
question.
Good question. I don't know. It's all very new. Yes. So if you are fine, there are options there to fine tune the model based on your own data, and whether you can then extract that. From what I understand, the model that you create fine tuning is entirely yours. So I'm assuming you will have the options to take the data and everything away, but I'm not entirely aware of all the details.
You know, there's still a risk no matter what. Anytime you upload any data to another platform, regardless of whether you could opt out or take your ball home with you at the end of the day, you're still releasing information through the internet. You know, and once it leaves your computer, you have essentially lost control. So you don't know anywhere between A, B, and C servers whether or not that information could be hacked or stored in someone else's servers, despite the fact that you may have opted out on a particular platform. So there's always still a risk. It's always been the risk even before the AI was created. And so, you know, it's just, you know, buyer beware. That's all you can say.
Another question was around, and I think this is a response to the Tennessee Act and the proposal in California, Stephen, that you brought up, is what role does US law play in the global VFX community? And I just want to add on to that, in the UK, there's the law side and there's also the incentives in the global VFX market piece of this, where, you know, there may be rules that are put in place in different territories that either, you know, incentivize or de-incentivize the use of AI. So curious what people think about this. And
yeah, I mean, the various different right of publicity issues, I'm aware that the EU is trying to formulate their own guidelines, their own particular laws, particularly in the area of privacy. We've known that the EU has been fairly stringent compared to what US laws are, except for California, because California, I think, has the most stringent privacy rights, anywhere. So generally, the U.S. and the European and other countries try to create laws that are consistent with each other. And then you have the outliers like South Africa who say, we don't care if it was created by artificial intelligence, we'll give you a patent anyway. So it really depends on a country by country basis. But I think that from my understanding at this point is that the US law is trying to be somewhat consistent with the EU, and the EU is trying to be consistent with the United States. So there's going to be a lot of similarities there. And sometimes, again, the European Union creates their laws that really are enough where the US has to change their laws to be consistent with the EU. And that was the case with the privacy laws. So, can be an incestuous relationship between the US and other major nations trying to deal with this particular issue.
Do you imagine this becomes sort of another layer of where we staff and where we place work in the global VFX market?
It could. It really depends on exactly how stringent the laws are. Same way with the United States, with the individual states, that certain states may be less stringent than others, and then you start seeing particularly production move to those particular states, maybe for those that will deal with artificial intelligence. Because there's always, you got 50 different, I think the founding fathers used to call it 50 different individual states that are experimenters. They experiment with a lot of different things. And so there's oftentimes not going to be a consistency across all 50 states when they're dealing with these on a state level. Of course, there are issues, and I think there is some discussion going on to kind of create a federal law that's going on, but it's still too early. There's, I think, a number of bills that have been presented or filed, but there's all going through the different committees, and really we don't know which ones are going to, if any of them, are going to be enacted into law.
I definitely learned this navigating the process of putting this panel together, that there are a lot of knowledgeable people out there in our community who are either limited to or cannot speak at all on AI publicly. And so I'm grateful for this, that we were able to get this incredible panel together at all. But you've all done a terrific job of sharing some of the fundamental concepts to people. Do you have any advice on where else they can go to learn, and maybe some the risks of not learning? And maybe we don't dwell too much on what the risks are of not learning, but what can we advise folks in terms of what they really should be paying attention to and where they might be able to go?
Go ahead, Andrew, please.
All right. I'm always a little cautious about this because I think every person's learning style is different. And what's good for me may not be good for you. Maybe you like books and someone else likes videos. Someone else likes top-down discussions. Someone else likes bottom-up discussions. So, there's a tremendous amount of information out there. There are books. I've got a book. Lots of other people have books. There are lots of videos. I think that there's really only two concerns, or two major ones. First one is try to stay up to date. There are multiple mailing lists out there that cover. There's one in particular called TLDR that comes out like twice weekly, and it's just got a bunch of headlines for, this model got released and these people published this thing, and you can skim it in 30 seconds, and they've done the work of capturing what's changing today and tomorrow, and you can dig in. There's always links. You can always dig into any of these things. But talk to your colleagues, find out what's interesting to them and what challenges you think your studio is facing, so that you can be both up to date and able to help them move forward. And always check out lots of sources to find the materials that speak to you, because there's little value in banging your head against an educational resource that someone else likes, but doesn't speak to you. So if the learning experience is hard, bail on that and find one that teaches you the way you like to be taught.
Another question from the audience was, can we get a comprehensive list of acceptable AI for the VFX industry? That's acceptable is a very squishy modifier there. But can the VES produce that? One of the things, and I'm going to hand it over to Michele, my co-tech committee member, because he's spent a lot of time thinking about this, that we've discussed is maybe not necessarily the approved list, but useful questions and some guidelines around how to go about getting to an answer of whether it's acceptable or not. So, Michele, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned in my presentation, it's very difficult to say what is acceptable and what is not. And there's really, at the moment, at least that I'm aware of, there's no clear framework that allows us to answer that question. So today, I would say, look at some of the questions I put in my presentation. Just make sure you check a lot of those aspects before you even consider a particular solution or another. But in my opinion, there is room for something better to be done. And again, I mentioned Creative Commons as an interesting example in a different field, in a slightly different segment. But the way they tackled some of the licensing concerns is very trying to translate it into simple terms might be an interesting idea to use as an inspiration of what could be happening in AI. Again, it's not going to be AI yes or AI no, but it might be AI using publicly scraped data from all over the internet. So this solution has it, yeah, and this other one is only private data or confidential data used within your studio. So, and follow up with all other factors that eventually constitute the solution might eventually allow you to clearly provide a picture of whether the solution is suited or not. There's still a long way to go. I feel that it's still an open problem and something we have to work on because of otherwise this idea of blocking the AI or stopping AI in any shape or form has the potential downside of really blocking very helpful innovation that we need in our industry to be able to be as efficient as we can be.
I'm going to string a couple of questions together that are around 3D data because rightfully so, it's pointed out that a lot of what we've been discussing is 2D. And so the one question was around if Andrew in particular, but everyone can jump in if you have thoughts about this, about generating 3D data using these same techniques. And then along with that, should the visual effects be doing that? Should the visual effects community or some entity within it be building a data set that's training a foundational model where we know the entire source of that data?
So, I mean, there are systems, there are 3D generators out there, and they work like the 2D generators. You can seed them with a text prompt or an image, or, you know, there are multiple modalities, and they will return to you a 3D model, and they have all the same powers and limitations and risks of the 2D models. But they can do other things, right? They can give you a normal map, they can give you a depth map, and they can even give you texturing information. So that's useful. And those systems exist. They are more recent than the 2D systems, and so they are still catching up in terms of quality and diversity. And then in terms of, you know, building a data set with, you know, an imprimatur of safety on it, I mean, that's really hard because who owns these things? Who gives you permission? You know, I have a didgeridoo that I brought. It's a musical instrument, right? So it's a piece of a tree. It's not a twig. I guess it's a branch that somebody cut off a tree. They cut off the ends, right? They hollowed it out, They painted it beautifully, put some shellac on it, put beeswax on the end, and you put it on your mouth and you play it. Who owns that? I mean, I bought it, but the person who made it, I met them in the forest, but I don't know their name. In fact, we didn't even share a language. The whole exchange was, sign language and smiles. So do I have authorization to put that into a 3D database? I don't know. I don't really feel confident that I do. I suppose in a purely capitalistic sense, I do, because I gave money for it. But I think in a moral and an ethical sense, this is a cultural object. And I don't think it's up to me to give it to the world to be used in arbitrary and unpredictable ways. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know.
There are a number of questions here that really relate to what should they be doing? Entry-level jobs, as you said, Andrew, are likely going away. So what guidance can we give new artists or new technical, TDs coming into this industry? What books can they be reading? And how do you imagine this evolving for them? What advice can we give people?
The thing is that this is a creative field, and everyone has their own creative path. And you need to find your strengths. I mean, do you like abstraction? And are you detail oriented? Then code might be the way for you. Are you, do you like going with emotional and big picture things? Maybe abstract art is the way for you. Do you like intense study and capturing of motion? Then, animation is the thing for you. So, and it's the same thing when these things collide with AI. Always develop your personal creative skills, because those are the things that, at least now and presumably in the near future, the computers cannot touch. So work on those things and then stay abreast of the technology and don't fear it. Just, again, the way I was saying, we have all these assistants that we now treat as everyday things. We don't call them AI anymore. Well, these new things that we're all so worried about, they will become every day and we won't be worried about them anymore. And so I would say treat them that way. Look at them as tools to be used and not feared. Integrate them into your workflow if you can in a natural way.
Thank you. Susan, in your presentation, you mentioned a handful of potential roles. You want to relate that back to people just coming into the industry and sort of what skills they might consider?
I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball. I do have a magic 8-ball. The answer is unclear. Ask again later. But I sort of feel, long time ago, I was working with the folks at Gnomon doing an interview preparedness and resume readiness class for what I thought was a bunch of visual effects artists. So I came in prepared with, these are the entry-level positions in visual effects. If you want to work in commercials, you're going to be a runner. If you want to work in features, you're probably going to do roto and match moving. And then to my utter surprise, everyone sitting in the audience was a game person who wanted to become an environment artist. So I had to go back and relearn. And what I learned is that the big game companies are incredibly smart. They do not have these positions advertised as jobs, but there's always an opening for a junior XYZ. So it feels like the visual effects studios, if they want to stay relevant, and you stay relevant by bringing in fresh blood, is going to have to reinvent what those entry-level positions are and how those can be supported by more senior level artists. I think there's probably also always positions in administration, where you can go in and work on some support kind of system and then find a mentor and dive into visual effects. That's kind of the traditional, non-traditional way that a lot of us ended up where they were. I mean, I've got a degree in medieval history with a minor in French, and here I am, you know. So I think it just depends on what drives you. And I don't know that there's like a flow chart as of yet. I think that we're still trying to figure it out. But I think it's really important to note that if you want to be a producer, you have to know how to produce. Back in the day, we used FileMaker Pro. Now we use ShotGrid or F-Track. The tools are going to be constantly evolving. Try and figure out your North Star and reverse engineer the tools to support your trajectory, and find a mentor. And that's my advice.
Susan.
Can I make a little comment? As I've indicated earlier, you know, there has to be some human element to create these works in order to get protection either by copyright or by patent. So I think there's always going to be the need for human creators involved, because that's what the studios, the streamers, TV networks, you know, VFX companies, all, because if they want to get any sort of protection, right, they just can't let AI wholly create these works, because there won't be any protection, at least under current laws. So there's always going to have to be some human element, and some significant human element, not just a de minimis. It has to be significant. And so there's always going to be that interplay between AI and human authorship in order to get the kind of protection that the studios, that the IP sellers are going to want. So I think that's my thing.
Another person asked how long before entry-level jobs go away. And I think going back to some of the points everyone's making, those jobs will evolve and change very likely. Some of the role titles and job descriptions might go away, but there will always be entry-level jobs into the industry doing interesting things. And I think I'm looking at Steve Shapiro's comment in the Q&A about VFX positions that will create and curate training data sets and models and tune them for studios. And that seems very reasonably likely. While I skim through, I'm actually curious, and I hope you guys don't mind me asking, how this has impacted your role and how you are envisioning your own futures related to the advent of AI and VFX.
Well, I certainly spend a lot more time discussing AI within my studio. So the number of questions that come up internally is taking now a significant portion of my time, and making sure we're building a strong strategy to be ready for anything that may be coming our way. So this is what is very directly impacting my day-to-day already significantly. So making sure we're ready for anything that taking advantage of the opportunities, and being really as prepared as we can be to everything that may be changing. So this is clearly it has always been a key part of my role, but not as much at the type of pace that we see today. So it looks like the innovation has kind of changed gear a little bit compared to what we have seen in the last 20 years or so. So that is definitely an important change, at least for me personally.
Anyone else want to chime in there? Reasonable. Go back to my point about speaking on the topic. What about advice for supervisors or leadership? You know, people who are managing teams involved with AI, or, you know, studios are having to make policy decisions, guideline decisions. It seems one of the bigger challenges from, besides all the legal navigation that has to happen, it's understanding just what all these different things is. And hopefully today's talks have gone a long way to help better classify and add common terminology to some of this. Do we feel like there's more we could be doing?
I'm not sure this is directly answering that question, but there's definitely upward pressure from people working who know about these technologies and can envision how they can help them. And some are interested in using it. And there has to be some way of issuing guidance to them. And it would be best if it wasn't off the cuff, one by one answers. But with the landscape changing, both the technical and the legal landscapes changing so quickly, I think that's a challenge coming up with a policy.
No, your off the cuff point is well taken. I think the changing landscape does make it a very live and fluid thing.
Yeah,
And
right.
I'm just going to read. Will AI force the industry to finally move forward to a new workflow without the baggage of the past 40 years? Is it reasonable to think that scale will play a role in how quickly adoption and adaptation occurs? You know, larger scale, it's studios or larger scale workflows and pipelines are going to take a bit longer than, say, new companies or boutique size facilities who are able to just kind of more nimbly adopt new technologies. Michele, I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. As always, when you're running a studio that is working actively on projects, is delivering movies, and you are your focus is trying to split the focus between delivering what you have in your slate and also reinventing a completely different way of creating content can be challenging. So I can see scenarios where somebody who's starting new without any kind of luggage and kind of established process, or not having to focus on a slate of project, might be able to experiment more freely. So it's always been a challenge, obviously, when, for big or companies or not as big companies who are already have products and they know what they're doing. It's always difficult to innovate at the same time. So, but that's what we have to do, right? There's no question in my mind that the kind of the key data points are, we know machine learning has proved to be an excellent way to solve challenging problems. There's no question about it. It has been clearly proved over and over. It can solve extremely complex problem extremely efficiently. So this is one data point. The other one is we're always looking for ways to make our workflow and our more efficient and create better art. So that is always the case. So combining those two, it seems clear that this will continue to play a very significant part in our future. And we just have to embrace it fully, understand it, first of all, understand what the limitations, what the challenges are, and then embrace everything that we can to, again, improve how we create our art and keep our artists delivering the outstanding work that they know how to produce.
I'll follow that up if I may. I think the best uses of AI, in fact, the best uses of all technology, is for human beings, right? It's to promote creativity and all the things we value. And I don't want to see AI take anybody's job. So, which is why I'm such a fan of assistants that help you do your job. And it may be the case that it's easier to design a system rather than to adapt an existing system. And so I can see that. But it's certainly the case that very many people are very interested in adapting their systems. And in that sense, that gradual adaptation is also typical of new technology. New companies come in with radical new approaches, and existing companies change to incorporate those approaches. And sometimes they fail and sometimes they don't, but the new companies sometimes fail and sometimes don't. I think as long as we keep asking ourselves, are we doing this for the betterment of all the people involved? That's a good guide.
And on that note of helping the humans, this question's for Susan, but feel free, anyone else who has more to add to this to help in that. Where do people go for mentorship? How can people get access to more learning? And this seems to be, this isn't the theme going on, it's not just entry level.
I think it's like finding a mentor anywhere. You kind of first have to identify what drives you, where you think you'd like to focus. And I use a similar approach when I'm suggesting that people network for a new job. You want to talk to people you already know who might know somebody, because the best way to get a mentor is to be introduced by somebody else who has that connection. There's an old saying, the only thing I care about when I get a resume is who handed it to me. It's a similar kind of situation. And I think that the other thing is just, it's like finding a mentor anywhere. You kind of have to do your research and look for the thought leaders, look for where they're posting. And you'll probably have to reach out to 10 people before you get 3 to respond to you. And my recommendation is to have people have a list of questions that they want to ask this potential mentor about their experience and how they might start their career. In my experience, when people come at you with your hand out, like, hey, I'm looking for a job, then no one will take your call. But if you say, hey, I'm looking to avail myself of your expertise, do you have 15 minutes for me to ask you 5 questions about your experience with X, Y, and Z? You are more likely to get a response. So the short answer is, it's not really AI specific. It's more about human nature. It's about leveraging your network. It's about not being afraid to make new friends and connections. And it's about follow through. But I'm sure that you guys probably have something a little more concrete you want to add.
I'll just agree with you, Susan. I think people have reached out for advice, and I've done the same. I've reached out for advice versus I'm looking for this or that. I've learned so much from those conversations, and most people are genuinely interested in giving their time to that.
Well, in my experience, the people who respond are genuinely interested in being generous with their time and sharing, and those that aren't, don't. And the other thing is, when I've been called upon to be the subject matter expert on X, Y, and Z, I always end up learning a boatload from the person who's talking to me about things that I have absolutely no idea about. So yes, machines are beautiful, but human beings are here to stay, and people are my currency. And, we're just such complex machines. Can you think about it? I mean, Andrew touched on what it would take to prompt the building of the cell phone that you just hold in your hand. I mean, I don't know. I think everybody should celebrate their humanness today.
But I don't think we need to say more than that right now. That's a great thing to end on. We have rounded the second hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. And thank you to our incredible panelists. This is so informative. I really, really enjoyed hearing everyone's presentations, and I know it's been incredible response on Facebook. There are a lot of Q&A in there that we may not have gotten to. I guess I'll find out from Ben if we can go back later and maybe answer some of the people's questions, but hopefully we got to enough of those questions that people are feeling good about it. So again, thank you, everyone. This has been a joy for me to participate in, and to thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you to the VES for having us. I have learned so much. This has been really incredible. Thank you.